for somebody who has truly been on the inside and you can see these things happening before everybody else does, I'd like to think we have a pretty good eye for this stuff. But very often, you see what's happening in Ukraine, you see what these wars have been like, you see what the culture wars are like here in the United States. I find it particularly perplexing how you get a significant portion, particularly of the highly educated liberal class, that presents themselves as smarter than the average person, but in reality, they're just as naive as anybody else. They really have no thorough understanding about how foreign and domestic policy actually works. I think the average American doesn't fully understand how ill-informed they truly are and how the powers that be only allow the American citizenry to have just a very small dose of what really goes on, just enough to keep them interested and just enough to make them think that they understand what's going on. But in reality, they are as in the dark as anybody. What is your take as far as the American populace goes and why they're so easily manipulated into following the most mundane, useless stuff instead of really paying attention to the things that matter?
Well, I think part of it is that we want to believe our government. For the most part, with a lot of exceptions, people in the United States lead pretty good lives. And we want to believe this, what we get. And then the information we get is highly restricted. So, for example, the first of the trilogy of the Economic Hitman trilogy, the first edition came out in 2004. But when I submitted the manuscript, it was rejected by 39 publishers. All the big houses rejected it. And what I later learned was that they were afraid of it, that they were afraid they were going to get sued by some of the companies I mentioned, that the U.S. government was going to come after them. They weren't going to renew contracts with the U.S. government and so on and so forth. And so finally, the 40th publisher, I get 39 rejection slips. How would you like that, And finally, the 40th publisher published it, and it almost immediately went to the New York Times bestseller list, stayed there for 72 weeks, I think it was, and it sold many millions of copies now in 38 languages. And then once it started selling, then there was a bidding war for the paperback rights with my publisher. I didn't own the rights anymore, unfortunately. On the 40th, you don't negotiate. I didn't negotiate that contract. I was just glad to get it. So my publisher made all the money off the paperback rights that were sold to Penguin, ultimately, for a lot of money. I didn't.
American way.
People think, well, you've sold millions of copies of this book. You must have made a lot of money off the book. I'm afraid not, because I had a bad deal. And yet what I really want to do is get the word out. The point I'm trying to make is that it's really difficult to publish and get highly distributed the information that is contrary to the way that our government wants us to think and the way I think most people truly want to think. We want to believe that we did the right thing in Vietnam and Iraq and Afghanistan. We want to believe that our government is right. We want to believe that. And I think that's true. The Chinese people that I know want to believe that China's doing the right thing. The Russians want to believe Russia's doing the right thing. The Ukrainians want to believe Ukraine's doing the right thing. It's that nationalistic pride that we have. And despite the fact that we say our press is not controlled here, like it might be in Russia or China, the fact of the matter is the advertisers have a huge influence. And, the advertisers are a lot of the corporations that I talk about. They don't really want these things to get out.
No,
No,
it's definitely inconvenient truth about how things are done. And what was it for you that was sort of like the end, like the last straw where you're like, yeah, this doesn't work anymore?
Well, so when I was in the business as a chief economist, and one of my clients, who was the head of state of Panama, Omar Torrijos, became a very good friend. And he basically pointed out to me, he said, you provide these economic models that show that if any country accepts these huge loans and invests them in big infrastructure, the economy will grow, everybody will prosper. And the fact of the matter is the models show that the GDP does grow. But Omar Torrijos pointed out to me, that's not a real measure of prosperity. GDP measures how well the wealthy are doing, the big corporations.
Right.
It does not measure the average person. So he said, these models that you're showing are faulty. They're skewed in favor of the wealthy and the corporations. I hadn't gotten that because in business school I'd always learned, and in the World Bank you learn to invest a lot of money in these huge infrastructure projects, and the economy grows and everybody does well. So for most of the time I had the job, I thought I was doing the right thing. But after I had that job for 10 years, and after about the 7th year, I began to understand I was selling a lie, and I was lying to myself. And it's so easy. And so again, here Americans were all lied to. We say, well, yeah, we're increasing GDP growth everywhere, and so on and so forth. But once I realized that I was selling a lie, I didn't want to admit it to myself. And there's another example. I was making a lot of money. I was flying first class around the world. I grew up the son of a New Hampshire teacher, to suddenly be hobnobbing with presidents and flying first class and staying in the best hotels.
This is, without question, one of the more underrated aspects of the congressional representatives that come from nothing and get thrust into this position of power, that I still don't think the average American even has a clue as to how significant it really is. That includes a couple of representatives that we happen to know personally that were, basically jettisoned over to Tokyo. And as I'm sure you were aware, did that nice little tour a couple of months ago, got to go on the bullet train, got to meet with heads of state in the Eastern Hemisphere and stay at, as I'm sure you would agree, probably 5-star hotels, 5-star meals, these types of connections that in terms of dollar value can't even be equated in many respects. And that's on top of having $175,000 a year salary, 8 full-time staffers, every benefit under the sun you can imagine, from healthcare to retirement to stock options, God knows what else that we're not even privy to. And so when the average person sees this and is trying to understand, why is it that these individuals that we're hoping will fight on behalf of working people are not actually doing it? Not necessarily that they don't want to help working people. It's just that the temptation is so great that the average person simply cannot figure out how to just sort of turn it off. But somehow you were able to do that. And that seems to be a very rare feat. Most people can't say no. And I think that that's the big lesson here.
Well, you're totally right. And now we're learning that even the Supreme Court has the same sorts of temptations thrown at them. I think part of why I was able to get this, several factors. One, as I said, I grew up the son of a New Hampshire teacher, my dad was a Spanish teacher, so I knew Latin America to a certain degree, and then I went into the Peace Corps in Latin America, and I saw firsthand poverty and extreme poverty, and so when Omar Torrijos started talking, that was the other thing. I met a remarkable man who was the head of a country and stood up against the system, and incidentally was undoubtedly assassinated. He died in a private plane crash that all the evidence points toward an assassination. There's never been a smoking gun found. There's no proof. If you want to kill someone, crashing their private plane is a damn good way to do it, because smoking gun goes down with a plane. Yeah. But I had this rare opportunity to learn, but still I didn't want to learn it. And then I have to tell you, I took some time off and rented a little sailboat in the Virgin Islands in the Caribbean. And I was anchored off St. John Island and rowed the boat ashore, climbed up this hill to an old sugar plantation with a 6-pack of beer late in the afternoon. And it was really idyllic. I'm surrounded by bougainvillea, this beautiful smells, and there's birds singing, and I'm looking out at the sun setting over the Caribbean, and I'm having a beer, and I'm thinking, this is a wonderful thing here. How idyllic can it be? And then it struck me that plantation was built on the bones of thousands of slaves.
Yep.
Then I had to look at how the whole hemisphere is built on the bones of millions of slaves, not just from Africa, but from China, from Ireland, our indigenous people. And then I had to admit that I too was a slaver. I was enslaving people in debt. I was colonizing the world. I was part of that. And that at that moment, I made the decision never to do it again. And I came back and quit and pretty much devoted most of the rest of my life to trying to turn the system around in this economic hitman strategy and the terrible calamity that we're causing around the world.
Thanks for watching. If you want to support our mission to transform politics into service, please like this video, subscribe, follow us on social media, and consider joining our Patreon, where you'll get early access to our interviews as well as other exclusive content. Links are in the description. Peace out.